Professor Mack, you mentioned the existence of many Islamic communities in the US, but in order to avoid a clash of civilizations, in my opinion, it is to communicate between different communities. Are those Islamic centers really communicating with other groups? Because to me it seems as if Islamic centers are more like a way for Muslims to communicate with other Muslims in the vicinity. But are they also communicating with other faith-based communities or other groups?
Yes, that's a wonderful question, and there are two examples. For instance, the Yantaru group of women in Pittsburgh on their website regularly had and still have on their blog dates and places for dawah, and zakat activities, charitable activities for the community. It's not the Islamic community, it's the regional community. And they're told these families need help, or we're going to raise money, or bring clothes, or whatever need is apparent in the community is advertised there, and there's a certain date and time when people come together to put their energy toward helping their neighbors, so without regard to religious background. And another example of that is, I'm sorry, it was just went out of my head. There was something else, and I'm not thinking of it right now. But the point is that you, as a Muslim, are obligated to help your fellow human beings, and whether that is in terms of actual support, financial support, psychological support, this is part of what you're obligated to do to be a good Muslim, and you don't really need to be contributing money or anything like that. The Prophet said that a smile is helping someone to get through a problem is helpful, education is helpful. So they regularly do communicate with other people in the community. And I wanted to say that, like, the MSA here often has, just last week, they had a tent set up for 2 days for information, when the MSA in past years has had similar sorts of opportunities. They come together to work on a project that benefits many more people. So they're not just talking to each other, they're helping people of all kinds to live in the world.
I can also add to that, it's the right question, right person. Now the president of the Islamic Society of Lawrence is sitting right there, Baha, and he's very active and making the Islamic Center right in the 19 Naismith intersection. It is a home for everybody. Very first time, the last year, I was directing that institution for a year. Very first time we had an interfaith dialogue in the ISM. There is a misconception among the Muslim communities across the United States that these interfaith dialogues are very dangerous. Do not go there because they are trying to convert you from Islam to another religion. It's a nonsense. There is no any single, we just, they had, the nice talk, people present the nice Middle Eastern, the foods, and then everybody was very friendly, and then very much, the happy, you are really relaxed, and then you learn from one another, you listen from one another, you learn, to respect one another. I think that it's a very active, the center, I'm sure that under his leadership, that he just, resumed. So it's going to be the very active part of the society. As I always say, that Islamic centers in this country is a U.S. institution, because we are going to be registered in the state of Kansas, that we are the non-profit organization, so we're not profiting, and then we have a documentation and everything. So this is a U.S. institution. It has a title, the Islamic Society of Lawrence, but it's a U.S. institution, and they do really, the good job, and then you're most welcome and then visit at any time. And one thing that, for example, they have a very nice program during the Ramadan, they call the Fastathon. So if you are interested in how the Muslims are tolerating this daytime fasting, well, this year we are going to fast in August. They are really long. You know, well, we got used to, those from the young age, but, they invite, the other faith groups. Whether you have a faith or not, it doesn't really matter. And then you go with them and, you fast, and at the end of the day, you are tasting the taste of hunger, and then you feel that your heart is soft. You humbled yourself, when the sun is setting down, So at the end, you had a really nice feast, and you really experienced those things, maybe once in a lifetime during your college years over here. They communicate, I should say. Probably they have to boost their communication a little more than what we are doing now. Probably you are right.
If I could just follow up on that, the Muslim Students Association's Fastathon collects money that goes to charitable organizations in the community. And they're not Islamic organizations. It's whichever, homeless shelter or whichever place needs help during that time. So the benefit to those who fast is that you get a wonderful meal at the end of that day. And the money that's collected for it goes to the community. So this is another example of the importance of helping everyone.
I have a general question. So, in my understanding, the concept of this panel is all about dialogue, right? So, we are trying to solve some problems. Maybe problems all around the world. So, there are still serious problems in the world, like famines, poverty, and so on. What is wrong with us? I mean, what can we solve? What is the point? What is our mistake? What do you think? In general.
My talk here was nothing to do with solving the world's problems. I spend so much time just trying to do it my own. I think, for me, it's do what you can with what's in front of you. I've been very blessed to do some incredible work in the last few years, especially since I've got my PhD and a job, and I've been able to travel and do some places. Anything from here in Lawrence to helping kids in the most remote parts of China, or even an internet thing with Mogadishu students in Somalia. And these aren't things I sought out. I didn't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to go help these kids in a remote village. These are things that just things that came or in front of me, and you do what you can with situations that you're presented with. And for example, I think my education has helped me, prepared me for being able to do more when I've been confronted or even stumbled upon things that I can do to help. So as far as an answer to things, for me, it's just, again, part of what both were saying is not as eloquent as the two, or the three panelists here, but it is basically, I think what can be solved by that is just more people kind of dealing with what's in front of you, not having to go too far out, or if you do, if it's part of travel. The only reason things are so far from me that I do this work is because that's part of my research and what I do. But I just try to help out as much as you can with things that you're confronted with or you deal with or face, whether it's here in Lawrence or somewhere on the other side of the world.
I'd like to riff on this question a little bit, and I didn't hear the first 1.5 talks, for which I apologize. The panel with the title Clash of Civilizations, and then most of the discussion I've heard so far revolves around the issue of religion, indicates to me that you've already bought into one of the primary premises of Huntington's work, which you should put to the question. I mean, in fact, two premises. One is that religion is a separately identifiable phenomenon. And number two is that it is a phenomenon which is somehow responsible for violence in a way that other human phenomena are not. I think both of those are historically deeply questionable. On the first issue, we know that religions like Buddhism and Hinduism didn't recognize themselves as religions in the sense we talk about it until Western secularists in the 19th century did the work of saying those are religions. We also know, if we study the work of John Locke carefully, that to identify a certain group of phenomena as a religion is itself a theological statement, which I think we should question. Right? And on the second, we know that the myth of religious violence developed out of the 17th century as a way of people trying to establish secular states, right? Justifying the secularism of those states, and telling a story that the state, in fact, itself will become an entity which will make the world a more peaceful place to live in. And that claim needs to be questioned, because there's a lot of evidence, starting with, for example, the 30 Years' War, which is always that war in Europe, which is the big war that was the religious war. There's very little evidence, in fact, that that's a religious war, if you look at who's fighting whom over the course of those 30 years. So to pick back up on what Professor Kennedy said, who is one of my colleagues, we really need to contextualize Huntington's work, both in terms of what he was doing in the 1990s, but we also need to contextualize it in terms of a claim among secular theorists, right? There is such a thing as religion which is separate from other phenomena, and secondly, that it is responsible for violence in a way that other human identifications and other human phenomena, land in China or water in China being two good examples, are not. So that's just kind of a general comment. And two books that I would suggest you look at that are quite recent. One is by Bill Kavanagh, called The Myth of Religious Violence, Oxford University Press, I think 2008 or 2009. And Elizabeth Shackman Hurd, who's written a book, I think it's called International Relations and Secularization, which came out with Princeton University Press last year. There's some really good work now being done on just the way we even think about this question. And I'm not convinced that thinking about this question of if there is such a thing as civilizations, simply in terms of religious violence, is very useful at all. And it hides too many things, as you pointed out, John, that we need to uncover.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I'll let everybody kind of get at this, but the whole idea of disentangling. And again, I think what you talk about is that I think people have found Huntington is comfortable.
It's great. If that's the way the world is,
it's a great little lens. You can just put those glasses on and, oh, now the world makes sense. But that disentangling the religion from land issues, regional issues, ethnic issues, takes a lot of work. And I think that's what you're talking about is we need to talk more about that work and what it takes to disentangle that. But I wouldn't have expected a question no less complicated. That's very good. But colleagues.
Well, I have a response, but maybe we could take this man's question first.
I wonder if there is a consensus among you, each of you, as to how successful Obama has been in being a transformational president.
There you go.
The Bush ad was a disaster as far as I'm concerned.
How do you really feel about that? That's a great point. I think the first thing, though, would be to let Mary finish with that and then get back.
Okay. I agree completely with what you were saying, and John, your comment about land in China, I've had the same experience in Nigeria. I have been on the ground in the crowd as the cars burned and you know, and then that night I have heard BBC reporting that it was a religious clash, the Christians and the Muslims, and it wasn't any such thing. It was all economic. When you have poverty, you can pay little 5-year-old boys 25 cents to go and burn down a church or a mosque, and they have nothing. So poverty breeds anything that politicians and greedy businessmen want it to breed, and then it gets reported with knee-jerk reactions. And so of course Huntington's easy phrase is popular to people who don't know, and this is my other point. In classes we talk about why it's important to learn about what Islam is and what Islam is not.